I've never really thought about that, but you do. You're looking at all of these funny different things and these different sequences, and it's a complicated mess that's going on in your head of all the different shots and what are the best processes and the best way of doing them, and hopefully you're making clear decisions about making the right choices, because they obviously have tremendous implications. And one thing I've learned is that if you don't fundamentally get the foundation layer of the work correct, in other words, if you photograph it in the wrong way or you misjudge something, it's like building a house, from that very foundation it's a bit wobbly, and it doesn't take too much to rock it and everything comes falling down, So really thinking through those early the early pre-production aspect of things, thinking through that, and thinking about how it is that you're going to achieve something. And the truth is, we work in a business. The visual effects, the film. You make a movie, and it sounds, it's not an art house thing. I'm working on movies that are hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever, and it's a business, and people have obviously wonderful opportunities and their wonderful craft and art amongst all of that. But at the end of the day, you're given a budget and you're trying to achieve something for it. One of the great things about working at Industrial Light and Magic is that we have a terrific R&D team there. So the advance in visual effects has meant that the base level, that a lot of people, you can walk into a store, buy a computer, buy some software, and you can create some pretty amazing looking images. Nowadays, 10 years ago you just couldn't do the same thing. Now you can do that. The base level is very high, but what we have at ILM is just an R&D team. So when we get a project in, more often than not, you're going, okay, I get this is this, and this. And so on Cowboys and Aliens, you're literally going, okay, when the alien's running around in the desert, what are the two things that are really going to sell that? One is interaction with his environment. Yeah. So the questions I would talk to the R&D guys on my team is saying, okay, what can we do to automate that process so that every time that alien is running around, every time we want a dust cloud, because it's a lot of it's hard desert, what do we have to do, and how do we automate that to a point where it becomes essentially, I'm saying cost effective? And how does he make his way through that world and cast a shadow on it without somebody building the topology? So you're constantly thinking about, okay, this is how we're going to make this work. What is the lighting model? What are the tools that are going to fundamentally make this process as simple and as bulletproof as possible? And if you think about putting an alien in a scene, the first thing is, if you can get the lighting right, okay, you've got a fighting chance. If you can make him interact with the environment in a cool way, so that might be dust, or maybe he's hitting some bush or whatever. How is he casting a shadow? How do you overcome all those things? So those are the things that I'm initially thinking, because those are hundreds of shots, right? So if you can make your process relatively efficient across hundreds of shots, you're really making a saving. The next thing is that somebody might say, okay, well, you're doing molten gold, as we did in this movie. So I'll talk to the R&D guys and the tech guys on the team, like Raoul Essig on Cowboys and Dan Pearson, and talk to them about what they think we can do with the tools that in their current state. And at that point, I might be explaining what I'm hoping might happen. And sometimes it's not so much as a artistic choice as just a physical fact. Okay, someone has molten gold poured on them. What actually happens, and how do we recreate that? And you can obviously do some research there, and you can think about all the different elements. Okay, the gold is landing on the person, it's cooling, and then it's cooling down, so it's changing state. It's changing, it runs across, it leaves gold behind. It's quite a complicated process, and you can talk through the different stages. And then you might be talking about something which is completely made up in my head, which is when the ship explodes, a weird blue shockwave goes through the explosion and sends what is, as photoreal an explosion as we could do into some other mode, right? And that's just me going, okay, this is what I think would look cool, And more often than not, those, you know, but it's a constant conversation, you know, you're having with those people. Yeah, well, there are, you know, I mean, there are many challenging shots. I mean, in the visual effects world, I'm always amazed that quite often the most spectacular thing is the easiest thing to sell. And it's more often than not, you know, the simple things that, you know, somehow are betrayed by, you know, the elements that you've shot or the quality of the light or whatever it is. And so what's amazing about this business, I think, generally, is you're constantly surprised by, you know, what happens next and what is difficult and what isn't. I think certainly in Cowboys and Aliens, I mean, just in difficulty level, blowing that ship up at the end was immensely difficult. But actually, just getting the gold to melt in a convincing way. And this is where, when you're thinking about the story, right, as opposed to just the work you're doing. So if you're looking at that gold and, you know, your grandma's watching it, right, and she doesn't really care that much about visual effects and is unsure of what you do anyway, right, or even what visual effects are, is does it look like gold? Yeah. So so if you melt a metal, it generally becomes white hot, and it doesn't have any other property than that. And so if you're in a storytelling mode, does that represent the thing that you're trying to tell the story of? So you constantly come up against these things that are more story driven, or so melting the gold technically was actually a very difficult thing to do, to turn it into this ferrofluid thing. And maybe part of that was just the actual concept of what it was, that it was so sort of outside of our kind of level of understanding of what something like that might be, you know. Whereas I thought, well, getting the lighting right on so many aliens in so many outdoor environments was going to be pretty tricky. In truth, that wasn't, because the great thing about shooting exterior is you really only have one light. You have the sun, you know. And if you can get that element correct, and with the incredible technology that ILM has built into their shaders with energy conservation, the level of realism you just get out straight out of the box is phenomenal. And even Jon Favreau on Cowboys was like, well, this is going to be tough. You know, we're not hiding aliens in the dark here. And we do a bit of that too. But just showing the aliens full on, full daylight, full hot sun, turned out to be something that really just wasn't that difficult, you know, with the technology that we brought to bear. I mean, they automated all the dust interactions. We scanned the terrain so the shadows would fall correctly. We introduced some software packages that would allow us to hit brush and move trees, and all of those things made that process pretty simple. And again, it's often the design elements that are tricky to pull off. Certainly, the gold. I'm thinking of other examples in Cowboys and Aliens. You know, the interior space of the ship. You know, what made sense to the story. You know, the aliens themselves. Are they just sort of creatures living within this kind of raw capsule, and they've made a much more organic system within it, like a wasp's nest on the side of a water tank was kind of my philosophy on that. And just keeping all of these kind of story ideas in your head as we went, you know.